When I first met Emma, she was a dazzling light in the center of a grey world. Her laugh echoed through the room like music, and her presence made every mundane day feel extraordinary. We built our life together with love and shared dreams, marrying young and growing into the kind of couple that friends envied. Or so I thought. It was a crisp autumn evening when I noticed the first crack. Emma had always been the social one between us, with her lively nature and effortless charm. That night, she had come home late from work, her cheeks flushed and eyes sparkling. She claimed it was an impromptu happy hour with colleagues, but something felt off. She'd never smelled like that particular floral perfume before. When I asked her about it, she waved it off, saying it was probably one of her co-workers who hugged her goodbye. "You're overthinking it, Dylan," she said with a breezy laugh. I let it go, though a small seed of doubt had been planted. Emma's work had recently picked up in intensity. She'd been promoted to team lead on a major project, which meant late nights and occasional weekend work. I was proud of her, of course, but I started to notice changes, small things at first. She'd take her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. She'd started to buy new clothes, edgier and more form-fitting than her usual elegant wardrobe. One Saturday morning, while Emma was supposedly at the office, I decided to surprise her with coffee and donuts. When I arrived, her desk was empty. Her co-workers said she hadn't come in that day. I brushed it off, reasoning that perhaps she was working elsewhere, but the unease simmered beneath my rationalizations. Later that week, we hosted a dinner party for a few close friends. As Emma moved effortlessly between conversations, pouring wine and laughing at jokes, I couldn't help but admire her. But when her phone buzzed and she excused herself to take the call, I couldn't ignore the way her face tightened before she left the room. I made an excuse to follow her, slipping out onto the back patio where I overheard snippets of her hushed conversation. "I told you, I'll call you later. Tonight isn't a good time." Her voice was strained, almost panicked. When she returned to the party, her smile was forced. I wanted to ask her about the call, but I didn't want to seem paranoid in front of our friends. Later, as we cleaned up the dishes, I casually mentioned it. "Oh, that? Just a colleague with questions about the project," she said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing important." The unease grew. One evening, I came home to find Emma sitting on the couch, her laptop open. She quickly closed it as I approached, her smile too bright. I asked her what she was working on, and she said it was just a spreadsheet for work. But when I offered to help, she grew defensive. "It's fine, Dylan. You wouldn't understand, it's boring stuff anyway." Emma and I had always shared everything, so her sudden secrecy was disconcerting. I reminded myself that she was under a lot of pressure, that I shouldn't read too much into things. But when I found a receipt for an expensive dinner at an upscale restaurant tucked into the pocket of her coat, a dinner I hadn't attended, I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I confronted her, she looked startled, then annoyed. "Are you seriously keeping tabs on me now?" she snapped. "That was with my boss, Dylan. We're trying to secure a client, and he thought it would help to have a one-on-one discussion in a more casual setting." Her explanation seemed plausible, but the tone in her voice stung. Had I really crossed a line? Was I imagining problems where there weren't any? The tension between us began to seep into other aspects of our relationship. Our conversations felt stilted, our laughter forced. She spent more time on her phone, claiming it was work-related. One night, as we lay in bed, I glanced over to see her texting with a faint smile playing on her lips. When I asked who it was, she rolled her eyes. "Just Mandy," she said. Mandy was her best friend, and they often texted, but something about her tone felt off. When I suggested she invite Mandy over for dinner, Emma hesitated before agreeing. Mandy came over the following weekend, her usual bubbly self. But when I jokingly mentioned how much Emma seemed to be texting her lately, Mandy's brow furrowed. "Oh, I've been so swamped at work. I barely have time to text anyone these days," she said casually. Emma's face tightened, and she quickly changed the subject. The final straw came one evening when Emma left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter while she showered. It buzzed repeatedly with notifications. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop, but my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen and saw a string of messages from a contact saved as Alex work. Alex, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Alex, you looked amazing in that dress today. I couldn't focus in the meeting. My stomach dropped. I placed the phone back where I found it, my hands trembling. When Emma emerged from the shower, I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. Who was Alex? Why was he texting her like that? And more importantly, why did she let him? I needed answers, but I knew I couldn't confront her without proof. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. If Emma had secrets, I was going to uncover them. The first crack had widened, and I was determined to find out what lay beneath. The husband who knew too little, Part 2, the chase for truth. Emma's behavior didn't just gnaw at me, it consumed me. I couldn't shake the image of those texts from Alex, or the way Emma's smile had a new edge to it lately, like she was holding onto something, or someone, just out of my reach. So, I decided to take the first step. I bought a small GPS tracker online. It arrived within days, a sleek device barely the size of a matchbox. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, I slipped out to the driveway and attached it discreetly beneath her car. It felt wrong. But wasn't it worse to sit in the dark, tormented by unanswered questions? The following morning, I watched her pull out of the driveway with her usual cheerful wave. I tracked her movements on my phone throughout the day. Work, lunch, work again. Nothing unusual. But then, around 7 p.m., the tracker pinged from a location across town. A high-end hotel. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, debating whether to go there. What excuse could I use to explain why I'd followed her? Instead, I waited for her to come home. When she did, she smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't hers. I clenched my jaw and asked how her day went. Exhausting, she sighed, kicking off her heels. I barely had time to grab lunch. My stomach churned. I didn't press her, but the seed of doubt had sprouted. Days turned into weeks. Emma continued her late nights, and I continued my quiet investigation. I found more receipts for expensive dinners, new lingerie hidden in the back of her drawer, and once, a lipstick shade I'd never seen her wear before. When I asked about it, she claimed it was an old tube she'd rediscovered. I didn't believe her. One Friday evening, I finally followed her. She'd said she was meeting Mandy for drinks, but the tracker led me back to that same hotel. Heart pounding, I parked across the street and waited. After half an hour, I saw her walk out, not with Mandy, but with a man. Tall, well-dressed, and clearly younger than me. He opened the passenger door of a sleek black car for her, and they drove off. I followed them to a small restaurant downtown. Through the window, I could see them laughing, leaning in close, her hand brushing against his. My breath came in short bursts as I snapped photos from the street. My head swam with rage and humiliation. I wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but my instincts told me to wait. I needed more than just a scene, I needed undeniable proof. That night, I confronted Emma. Not with the photos, not yet, but with the hotel visits. I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time at that hotel downtown, I said, keeping my voice even. What's going on, Emma? Her face went pale, then hardened. How do you know about that? She asked, her tone sharp. Does it matter? I shot back. Who's Alex? For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, she sighed. If you must know, she began, her voice trembling, I've been seeing a therapist there. For anxiety. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. It was a good lie, almost believable. But I saw through it. And does your therapist also send you messages about how amazing you look in a dress? I asked, my voice rising. Does he take you to dinner at fancy restaurants? Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was cornered, and she knew it. But instead of admitting the truth, she doubled down. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady now, almost defiant. "You're being ridiculous, Dylan. If you're so paranoid, maybe you're the one who needs therapy." Her words cut deep, but they only steeled my resolve. I wasn't paranoid. I was a husband fighting to uncover the truth. And I wouldn't stop until I had it. Emma's behavior didn't just gnaw at me, it consumed me. I couldn't shake the image of those texts from Alex, or the way Emma's smile had a new edge to it lately, like she was holding onto something, or someone, just out of my reach. So, I decided to take the first step. I bought a small GPS tracker online. It arrived within days, a sleek device barely the size of a matchbox. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, I slipped out to the driveway and attached it discreetly beneath her car. It felt wrong. But wasn't it worse to sit in the dark, tormented by unanswered questions? The following morning, I watched her pull out of the driveway with her usual cheerful wave. I tracked her movements on my phone throughout the day. Work, lunch, work again. Nothing unusual. But then, around 7 p.m., the tracker pinged from a location across town. A high-end hotel. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, debating whether to go there. What excuse could I use to explain why I'd followed her? Instead, I waited for her to come home. When she did, she smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't hers. I clenched my jaw and asked how her day went. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her heels. I barely had time to grab lunch. My stomach churned. I didn't press her, but the seed of doubt had sprouted. Days turned into weeks. Emma continued her late nights, and I continued my quiet investigation. I found more receipts for expensive dinners, new lingerie hidden in the back of her drawer, and once, a lipstick shade I'd never seen her wear before. When I asked about it, she claimed it was an old tube she'd rediscovered. I didn't believe her. One Friday evening, I finally followed her. She'd said she was meeting Mandy for drinks, but the tracker led me back to that same hotel. Heart pounding, I parked across the street and waited. After half an hour, I saw her walk out, not with Mandy, but with a man. Tall, well-dressed, and clearly younger than me. He opened the passenger door of a sleek black car for her, and they drove off. I followed them to a small restaurant downtown. Through the window, I could see them laughing, leaning in close, her hand brushing against his. My breath came in short bursts as I snapped photos from the street. My head swam with rage and humiliation. I wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but my instincts told me to wait. I needed more than just a scene, I needed undeniable proof. That night, I confronted Emma. Not with the photos, not yet, but with the hotel visits. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time at that hotel downtown," I said, keeping my voice even. "What's going on, Emma?" Her face went pale, then hardened. "How do you know about that?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "Who's Alex?" For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, she sighed. "If you must know," she began, her voice trembling, "I've been seeing a therapist there. For anxiety. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. It was a good lie, almost believable. But I saw through it." "And does your therapist also send you messages about how amazing you look in a dress?" I asked, my voice rising. "Does he take you to dinner at fancy restaurants?" Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was cornered, and she knew it. But instead of admitting the truth, she doubled down. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady now, almost defiant. "You're being ridiculous, Dylan. If you're so paranoid, maybe you're the one who needs therapy." Her words cut deep, but they only steeled my resolve. I wasn't paranoid. I was a husband fighting to uncover the truth. And I wouldn't stop until I had it. After the confrontation, Emma's defiance only deepened the rift between us. Our home, once a haven of shared dreams, became a battlefield of unspoken tensions. I couldn't let it go, not after seeing her with that man. But I also knew Emma well enough to recognize that she would double down on her lies if pressed too hard. I needed solid proof, something she couldn't explain away. I spent the next few days replaying every interaction in my mind, scrutinizing her words and actions for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, I continued to track her movements. The hotel visits became routine, always in the evenings. The same black car, the same man. I couldn't bear to follow her inside, fearing what I might see, but the photos I took from my car spoke volumes. One evening, Emma mentioned she had a late meeting at work. Instead of questioning her, I acted casual, even supportive. "Good luck with the meeting," I said, forcing a smile as I handed her a thermos of coffee. She kissed me on the cheek, a gesture that felt strangely rehearsed. As soon as she left, I grabbed my jacket and followed her. This time, I stayed close enough to see her enter the hotel. After a few minutes of deliberation, I summoned my courage and walked inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the air perfumed with a subtle mix of citrus and lavender. I approached the front desk, trying to appear calm. "Hi," I said, flashing a polite smile. "I'm meeting my wife here, but I think I've got the wrong room number. Could you help me out?" The receptionist hesitated, her professional smile faltering. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't disclose guest information." "Of course," I replied quickly, pretending to fumble with my phone. "Maybe I can call her." As I turned to leave, I caught sight of a couple stepping out of the elevator. It was Emma and the man. They didn't notice me, too engrossed in their hushed conversation. My chest tightened as they walked toward the hotel bar, their body language intimate, like a pair sharing a secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I'd seen enough to confirm my suspicions, but I still lacked the concrete proof I needed. The next morning, I reached out to a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I was done playing games. Within days, the investigator had compiled a report, photos, timestamps, and detailed accounts of Emma's meetings with her Alex. His name wasn't Alex at all. It was Caleb, and he wasn't just some random fling. He was a therapist at a nearby clinic, Emma's so-called anxiety specialist. The irony stung. The man she'd been turning to for support was the same one she betrayed me with. Armed with the report, I decided it was time for a confrontation. But this time, I wanted a neutral setting. I suggested we meet for dinner at her favorite restaurant, framing it as an attempt to reconnect. "It'll be nice to have some time just the two of us," I said, feigning warmth. Emma hesitated but eventually agreed. That evening, I arrived early and took a seat near the back, where I could observe the entrance. Emma arrived 10 minutes late, looking radiant in a crimson dress I'd never seen before. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing, a reminder of the woman I'd fallen in love with. As she sat down, I slid the investigator's report across the table. Her smile froze, her fingers tightening around the edge of the menu. "What's this?" she asked, her voice strained. "Take a look," I said evenly. She flipped through the pages, her face paling with each photo. When she reached the section detailing Caleb's identity, she slammed the folder shut. "You've been spying on me," she hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare try to turn this on me," I snapped. "I trusted you, Emma. And this is what you do." For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling. "Oh, really?" I said, my anger boiling over. "Because it looks an awful lot like you've been sleeping with your therapist." She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "It's complicated," she whispered. "Try me," I shot back. Over the next hour, Emma spun a web of half-truths and justifications. She admitted to emotional oversteps, but insisted their relationship had only recently turned physical. She painted herself as a victim, claiming she'd been vulnerable and that Caleb had taken advantage of her. "He understood me in ways you never could," she said, her voice breaking. The words cut deeper than I expected. So, what now? I asked, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Emma looked away, her silence speaking volumes. She wanted out, but she didn't have the courage to say it. I think you've already made your choice, I said, standing up. She didn't stop me as I walked away, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal. The next day, I packed a bag and left our house, unable to bear the weight of her presence. It wasn't just the affair that broke me, it was the realization that the woman I'd loved had been slipping away for years, piece by piece. As I drove away, I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let her actions define me. This was the end of our story, but it wasn't the end of mine. The weeks after leaving Emma were a blur of emotion. I oscillated between anger, heartbreak, and a hollow sense of betrayal. Yet, even with the distance I'd created, I couldn't stop myself from obsessing over the details. Questions haunted me. How had I missed the signs? How long had it been going on? And most troubling of all, had I ever truly known the woman I'd married? One evening, as I sat in my temporary apartment staring at the investigator's report, I noticed something I'd previously overlooked: Caleb's address. It was a minor detail in the sea of damning evidence, but now it burned in my mind. A part of me wanted to drive there, confront him directly, demand answers. But another part of me whispered that the truth I'd uncovered was already more than enough. I decided instead to reach out to Emma's best friend, Mandy. She and I had always gotten along, and if anyone could shed light on the situation, it was her. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "I'm surprised you wanted to talk," Mandy said as she sipped her latte. Her eyes were wary but kind. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted. "I'm not here to make you choose sides, Mandy. I need to understand." Mandy hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I don't know everything, Dylan. But I can tell you this: Emma's been different for a while now. Distant, distracted. She started pulling away from me too." "Did you know about Caleb?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Her expression darkened. I had my suspicions. She'd talk about this therapist of hers like he was some kind of savior. But when I pressed her, she'd shut down. "I'm sorry, Dylan. I should have told you." Mandy's confession left me with more questions than answers, but it also reignited my determination. I decided to dig deeper, this time focusing on Caleb. A quick online search revealed glowing reviews from clients and a polished professional website. But buried within the pages, I found something odd: a section titled Personal Philosophy, where he spoke at length about emotional intimacy and breaking barriers. It felt more like a manifesto than a therapy practice. I decided to reach out to one of Caleb's former clients whose name appeared in an old online review. Posing as a potential patient, I called her under the guise of wanting more information about his methods. "Caleb," the woman said, her tone sharp. "Stay far away from him. He's a fraud." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Look, he's charming, no doubt about that. But he crosses lines. He gets too personal, too involved. It happened to me, and I've heard similar stories from others." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Caleb wasn't just a therapist, he was a predator cloaked in respectability. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Emma. Her voice was subdued, almost meek. "Dylan, can we talk?" she asked. "Talk about what?" I replied, my tone colder than I intended. "About us. About everything." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the next day. We chose a park near our old neighborhood, a place that once held happy memories. Emma arrived looking haggard, her usual poise replaced by visible strain. She sat across from me on a weathered bench, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I've made a mess of everything," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know it wasn't just about Caleb." Her words hung in the air, heavy and disorienting. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. I've been unhappy for a long time, she admitted. It's not your fault. I didn't know how to fix it. Caleb was a distraction, but the truth is, I've been lost. Her confession felt like both a revelation and a slap in the face. She wasn't absolving herself, she was shifting the narrative, reframing her betrayal as a symptom of a larger issue. As we talked, Emma revealed more about her sessions with Caleb. She painted him as both a confidant and a manipulator, someone who blurred the lines between professional and personal. He made me feel seen, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I realize now it was all about him, not me. Her words should have brought me some measure of satisfaction, but they didn't. If anything, they deepened my resentment. Emma's choices had shattered our life together, and now she wanted to lay the blame at the feet of a man who'd merely exploited the cracks she'd allowed to form. After our conversation, I resolved to take the next step, divorce. It was a painful decision, but it was the only path forward. I couldn't rebuild what Emma had destroyed, and I wouldn't let myself be dragged further into her spiral of excuses and regret. As I worked with my lawyer to finalize the paperwork, I found myself returning to Caleb. The man had ruined more than just my marriage, he'd preyed on Emma during a vulnerable time and likely done the same to others. I filed a formal complaint with the licensing board, attaching the evidence I'd gathered. The fallout was swift. Within weeks, Caleb's practice came under investigation, and several other former clients came forward with similar accusations. While it didn't undo the damage he'd caused, it brought a sense of closure. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace. The rabbit hole Emma had led me down was dark and painful, but it taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I'd realized. The betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. As I signed the divorce papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This chapter of my life was over, but the next one was mine to write. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like a ghost of the man I'd once been. The past few months had drained me emotionally, physically, and financially. But as I signed the final papers, I realized that this chapter, painful as it was, had to end. It was time to reclaim my life and move forward. Emma had moved out of the house long before the ink dried on our divorce. She left behind memories in every corner, photos, trinkets, and faint echoes of our laughter. I decided to sell the house. Staying there felt like living in a mausoleum of a life that no longer existed. Packing up was bittersweet. For every box I sealed, I found another relic of what once was an old vacation postcard, anniversary gifts, and even a forgotten note she'd left in my lunch years ago. Each item was a reminder of the love we'd shared, now tainted by betrayal. The first few weeks after the divorce were the hardest. Friends and family tried to rally around me, offering distractions and advice, but their words often felt hollow. I spent most of my nights alone, replaying every moment, questioning where it had all gone wrong. But then, something shifted. I realized that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could decide how to respond to it. I began focusing on myself. I joined a local gym, determined to channel my anger and sadness into something productive. The weights became my therapy, each lift a step away from the man I'd been and closer to the one I wanted to become. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page in an effort to make sense of the chaos. Slowly but surely, the fog began to lift. Emma reached out a few times, mostly about logistical matters, splitting bank accounts, retrieving belongings. But once, she called late at night, her voice shaky. "Dylan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her words stirred a mixture of emotions. Anger, sadness, and even a flicker of compassion. But I knew that forgiving her didn't mean forgetting or inviting her back into my life. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to move on." The fallout from Caleb's investigation continued to make waves. His license was suspended, and more clients came forward with allegations of misconduct. It brought a grim satisfaction to know he couldn't exploit anyone else. Emma's name inevitably became entangled in the scandal, and she had to leave her job to escape the whispers and judgment. While part of me felt vindicated, another part felt pity. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. One evening, months after the divorce, I found myself at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend. I was hesitant to go, knowing that the whispers and curious glances would follow me, but I decided it was time to re-enter the world. As I mingled, I found myself laughing at jokes, engaging in conversations, and feeling a sense of normalcy I hadn't experienced in months. Toward the end of the evening, a woman approached me. Her name was Sarah, a friend of the host. She was kind, with a warm smile and an easy laugh. We talked for hours, sharing stories and finding common ground. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. As the months turned into years, the wounds Emma left behind began to heal. I sold the house and moved into a smaller place, one that felt like my own. I continued to focus on my health, my career, and building new relationships. Sarah and I grew closer, though I was careful to take things slow. Trust, I'd learned, was something that needed to be rebuilt one brick at a time. Looking back, I realized that Emma's betrayal, as painful as it was, had taught me invaluable lessons. It forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and to rebuild myself from the ground up. While I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, I emerged from it stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. One day, as I was unpacking a box of old belongings, I came across a photo from our wedding. Emma and I stood side by side, beaming with joy, oblivious to the challenges that lay ahead. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But instead, I placed it back in the box. It was a part of my story, after all, and every story, even the painful ones, deserves to be remembered. The past no longer defined me. The future was mine to create, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.